Hi, everybody, and welcome. Thank you very much for joining the Commonwealth Chamber of Commerce for our online fireside chat today. Today, we're going to have a look at Malaysia, and more specifically, we'll be discussing the concept of smart manufacturing. And this has huge potential to bring about great levels of innovation and efficiency, bring about greater automation, and use more flexible and advanced technical training for the workforce, which can only be good. We continue to move forwards towards our digitalized future, and this type of manufacturing is an integral element of economic development, and we really need to understand it well, both in terms of the Commonwealth generally, Malaysia, and manufacturing worldwide. So we're really delighted to have this amazing speaker today who's going to talk about the productivity of the country's powerhouse manufacturing centre. And discuss this exciting new momentum. So Katja Coogan is the founder, employee of Chowbotics, a pioneer in the food robotics industry. And that builds fresh food robots that have been praised even by the New York Times and Bloomberg and have been named one of the most innovative companies in the world. Their salad-making robot, believe it or not, Sally, won them the most innovative product of the year for 2018 in the Best in Biz Awards. So Coogan joined the Silicon Valley startup as its first employee and later went on to be the founder of both its China and Malaysia branches. Coogan, it's wonderful to have you here with us today. I also have with me my colleague, Martina Hamad, who's going to provide a brief overview of the Malaysian manufacturing sector to start off before we start our deep dive with Coogan into high-tech manufacturing in Malaysia. And Martina's going to talk about the country's tech startup ecosystem. She's originally from Pakistan and she's actually there right now and she's going to be presenting from there. She's an MPhil graduate from a university in Hong Kong and she specializes in Asia Pacific geoeconomics. So Martina, over to you for your short presentation.
Of course. First of all, thank you for having me here, guys. I'm really excited to be here. I'm just going to give a brief overview of Malaysia's manufacturing economy. I'm also going to talk a little bit about the tech startup ecosystem. And mainly, I want to focus on how the collaboration between the two can unleash limitless potential for Malaysia's smart manufacturing. But let's start from the top, shall we? So first of all, I want to talk about the performance of the manufacturing sector. Although it has been since the early 2000s eclipsed by the service sector, but still, despite that, it remains a pillar, it remains a backbone of the economy. It provides almost 1/4 of the nation's GDP. It provides over 80% of its exports. So you can see that Malaysia is a powerhouse in manufacturing. And let's talk about COVID a bit. So from 2019 to 2020, you can see that the performance was not as high. The expansion was not as much, but you have to understand 42% of the global FDI plummeted during the peak of COVID in March 2020. So even though global FDI was almost halved, Malaysia still saw an expansion in investment value. It saw an expansion in the amount of projects that were taking place. And that's just 2020. And last year, the amount of projects actually tripled. As you can see here, almost 4,000 projects of investment in the manufacturing sector of Malaysia. And the value has increased by almost 114%, which is huge. And according to the Malaysia Investment and Development Authority and their research and development centers, they say that this trend is predicted to continue. Going even further into it, you can see in terms of production capacity, there was an expansion of 7.4% back in 2021. And actually, the decade's average was 4.5% when it came to expansion. So even though in 2020 it was lower, it wasn't that far off. And you can see, I just wanted to give a snapshot of just 1 month in 2021, where the manufacturing output was actually increased on a monthly basis by 68%. So you can see that not only has Malaysia always been a manufacturing powerhouse, it continues to be so. It continues to expand. Now, moving on to the subsectors. So what exactly is it in the manufacturing sector that is providing this growth? You can see the three main circles are petroleum, chemical products, plastic, rubber, the stuff that Malaysia is known for. There's also non-metallic and metallic materials. There's transport equipment, but I also want to highlight that production capacity has increased for electricity and mining. And I must point out here that both of these are essential for smart manufacturing. I will go into that later on. But before I go into the benefits of smart manufacturing, Some of you might be wondering what it is exactly. I'll just give a brief definition. So smart manufacturing is when you employ cyber integrated systems into the manufacturing process across all aspects of the value chain. You provide automation, you provide advanced technologies such as artificial intelligence, blockchain. You use all of these to heighten the efficiency and productivity of the manufacturing process. So when you have improved productivity, what happens and how does it happen? First of all, what happens is when you have a greater access of data through this technology, both the manufacturers and the suppliers, they understand what exactly needs to be made and for how much quantity. This actually saves time. This saves a lot of material that could be wasted because you don't have access to data to tell you accurately how much you need. And this is a cyclical process. How so? Because when you save this time and you save this capital, you can invest it back into this manufacturing economy. You can incubate greater innovation, and you can focus on making the products of even higher quality. And then when you don't waste materials and you don't waste time, actually on both the manufacturing side and the supply side, you're actually reducing your carbon footprint. Therefore, you're increasing your energy efficiency. And as you all know, with the current situation we're in, the climate change issues that we're facing, this is integral, not just for the country itself, but for the world, right? And then what you have after that is you have an increase in jobs. How does that happen? Because when your manufacturing economy becomes more technologically advanced or requires more technology, the tech-savvy youth of the country will be more interested in joining the manufacturing economy. And I have to point out here that a lot of the tech-savvy labor workforce actually comes from the tech startup ecosystem because they have these great ideas, they have this great drive, and they want to give back to the country. And this is a superb way to do so, because when you have an ecosystem that is thriving, a startup ecosystem, it gives back to the manufacturing sector. They are vital for the scaling up of the economy. So I just want to give some metrics to showcase Malaysia's potential when it comes to their tech startup ecosystem. In 2020, the Global Startup Ecosystem Report stated that Malaysia was ranking 11th when it came to the top 100 emerging ecosystems. And having a perfect 10 score for market research and performance is not easy. And the 9 in talent just goes to show what a robust and thriving tech workforce they have that they can utilize, that they can capitalize on for their smart manufacturing industry. The Global Innovation Index of 2020 ranked Malaysia only second to Guangzhou in southern China as the most innovative upper middle income country in the region of Asia Pacific. And then when it comes to unicorns and startups, in 2021, there was a 58% increase in IPOs compared to 2020 for Malaysia. And this was a great year because Malaysia actually introduced themselves to their first unicorn, which is the e-commerce platform for selling cars, Carsome. And now we still have 3 amazing startups that are on the radar. And we're hoping and we're expecting that they will actually become unicorns soon, maybe this year or soon in the coming years. These include Aerodyne. Aerodyne is actually globally ranking 3rd best when it comes to making drones. Then you have the financial tech company SoftSpace that has won the World Procurement Award. And then you have iPay88, which has won not only an award, but has been adopted by the Japanese mammoth company NTT Data and has been used worldwide as well. So when you have such amazing startups happening, you have a thriving ecosystem, I'm pretty sure that Malaysia will, in the coming decade, will see an amazing growth, and their smart manufacturing ecosystem will be one that the world will watch. Thank you so much, Julia. Back to you.
Thanks, Martina. That's really interesting. It's so useful, I think, to see everything in context. And it's amazing how well the Malaysian manufacturing sector has been performing, even with the negative effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. Well, Kugan, we've got many questions for you, and I'm sure everybody's very interested in your journey and all that you're doing and have done so far. So why don't we kick off and hear all about you and your personal journey up to now before we actually go into some of the more nuts and bolts of smart manufacturing?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Julia. That was a good presentation by Martina. I think that gave like a good overview of how manufacturing is in Malaysia. We'll be covering a lot more things in this talk. And I think you gave me a very good introduction, Julia. So if there's anything specific you want to know about me, I can tell you, but I think
All
that's
right. Hey, did you go to university? What did you do? How have you worked in China as well as Malaysia? I mean, these are pretty amazing skill sets.
Sure. So I went to school in Nebraska, which is quite an unusual place to go to. All right.
Nebraska, gosh, I once went there on a Greyhound bus in the late 90s.
There you go. Right. Yeah. Yeah, Nebraska is actually a surprisingly nice place to study. It's quaint, it's got a nice small town vibe to it. All right. It's a college town, right? So it's actually a good place to study just because you don't have too many distractions, You're not in like a major city, You're sort of left on your own. I had great friends, studied there. Graduated in 2013, end of 2013, moved to Silicon Valley immediately. I didn't have a job, obviously.
Was that a culture shock, Nebraska to Silicon Valley?
Not really. Okay, culture shock in the sense that things work very differently there, right? So obviously everyone still spoke the same language. People are just as nice, all right? I would say Nebraska is a more quintessential American experience, all right? Silicon Valley, not so much, because it's very mixed. You've got people from all over the world, right? Coming to Silicon Valley. So it was a very good experience. So I just moved there. I didn't know anyone. So I essentially just moved there and started a startup with two of my other college buddies.
Mm-hmm.
We failed miserably.
From Nebraska. These are people.
From Nebraska.
That's amazing. Cool.
That's right. And we did this for about a year and a half till we ran out of money. All right. At which point,
what startup was that? What was that?
This was an electric folding bike startup.
Okay.
Right. So mobility was like this major thing then.
Yeah,
right? I was quite passionate about it.
Mobility.
It is. Like now I realize that we were just a little bit ahead of the curve.
Mm-hmm.
So now, if you notice, you've got companies like Lime, and another one, all right? So one was acquired by Uber for like $1 billion.
Yeah.
Right? So these are like small scooters that you like sort of zip around town. That was essentially what we were going for. That wasn't the exact form factor, but that was sort of the idea, right? So we were sort of going for that. But this was about a good 5 years before that, right?
Yeah, so no first mover advantage there.
No. Oh, well, you have first mover advantage if you get a lot of money. You get like proper funding and all that. But we were like very new, right? So we didn't know what we were doing. It was like, you know what? Let's try something, right? So we've already graduated. So we were like, instead of sort of getting a job in like a big company, we were like, all right, why not just try something new? It fails and then we just go get another job, right? I mean, we're engineers after all, we're going to get a job. So there's always job security. It's not like I'm ever going to stop. So it's just a matter of which company you work for, right? So I was like, all right, you know what? I'm young enough. I can go for like 2-3 years without getting a pay. So there was a point when we were living for $1 a day, which was below the poverty line, by the way, all right? And things got so bad that we actually had to move into a van. So we lived in a van for like 10 months, all right, while we were building the startup, because we were like, we need to spend all our money on the startup. So how do we do that, right? So how do we maximize money into the startup? We minimize money everywhere else. So we did that. I mean, that was an adventurous time in my life. So this was like mid-2015. And once we realized that we ran out of money, so we were like, all right, what do we do next, right? And so this guy comes to me, all right? So we had this thing called Tech Shop, right? So it's essentially this facility where you could it's essentially a co-working space, right? So it's a very engineering focused co-working space. So you had all these like quirky guys and girls like coming in and like doing all kinds of interesting stuff. All right. So this guy was building a salad making, in fact, not a salad making robot. He was building a food robot at the time. Right. So he was like, dude, do you want to join me? He didn't have anyone. So it was just him. And he was an electronics engineer. So my background is a mechanical engineer, right? So he needed someone to actually build the hardware out. Yeah. So he was like, dude, do you want to join me? And I was like, hell yeah, I want to join you. So like, obviously I saw what he built. It was quite interesting. But soon enough, we realized that we needed to build something else. So we pivoted. So instead of building a food robot, a full-fledged food robot, right, which is quite complex.
Yes. So
we actually had an investor. This investor had a bunch of McDonald's franchises, right? So he owned like 15 McDonald's outlets, 15 or 16, right? So this dude was like, guys, if you build a salad-making robot, I will buy it off of you. So we were like, that's great. It was like a point blank suggestion. He was like, if you do this, I know for a fact that people will like this. I will like it personally, So we were like, all right, great, let's do this, right? So we built that out. So we actually built it in 4 months, all right? So I joined, I want to say like August or September of 2015.
Yeah.
Then by December of 2015, we had our first prototype. So we call it a minimum viable product, right? So this is literally 4 months. And this was like a complex product. This was, the size of a vending machine. And we built it in like 4 months. So this was actually a beautiful time in Silicon Valley, right? Just because you had this place called Tech Shop, which actually allowed you to bootstrap a hardware startup, because the capital cost to building a startup like that is incredibly high.
Yes.
Because it's not a software startup. Software startups are a lot easier, right? Software startups depend on having great coders, right? Mm-hmm. Great engineers, software engineers, whatever.
Different challenges, anyway.
Let me rephrase that. When I say easy, I don't mean it's easy in the sense of...
You don't need all the physical stuff.
Yeah, right. Exactly. That's right. So I mean easier in the sense that, okay, if you screw up, you can essentially code in a patch, right? So you can patch the code pretty easily, right? So you can ship a product to your customer and then you realize that something's broken. You just patch it up, right? That's what Apple does, right? So if you have an iPhone, it gets updated every few months. What is that? Essentially patching up vulnerabilities, right? Yeah. But with hardware, you can't do that. If you ship something to your customer and it breaks, you're screwed.
Yes.
Right? Now you have to ship a replacement part, right?
Very expensive, can destroy your margins. Yeah.
Exactly. It's very expensive. It takes a very long time, So yeah, it's challenging in a different way. All right. I would definitely say it's harder, right? So yeah, we built that in 4 months, right? So once we built that, people obviously liked it. We immediately got into this thing called Techstars, all right? It's an accelerator. So Techstars at the time was the second best accelerator in the world after Y Combinator. So Y Combinator was the premier accelerator. It was the top dog, right? We didn't get into Y Combinator, we got into Techstars.
Yeah.
We had a good time as well. So Techstars was in Austin, all right? Yeah. So we moved our operations, which was essentially 2 people. So it was easy to move, right? It wasn't it wasn't like difficult anyway, So we just we packed our bags and one day we just drove up to. We didn't even fly there. We drove to Austin. Yeah. From San Francisco. Because we had the road, we can't fly it out. So we had to sort of put it in a car and we essentially just drove there.
Right, yeah.
Right, exactly, And and then we sort of built it there in Austin, Texas. This was about 4 months. That was a great experience. So that's when we got our first, I think this was so the moment you join an accelerator, the way it works is accelerators take a cut of your equity stake and in return, they give you some money, right? So I think we got something around the ballpark of 140K, all right, USD. For about, I think 7 or 8% of the company, all right, which is a relatively good deal, right? So they connect you to people in the ecosystem as well.
Yeah.
Obviously, we got in there and we were most of these other startups were software startups or logistics startups and all that. There was another hardware startup from Italy, actually, They were quite interesting as well. But yeah, we actually turned out to be the most successful startup in the cohort. So there were 10. Wow. Yeah. So there were actually 10 startups in the cohort, right? Now there's another company that's also doing really well, right? They're called Helper Bees. They're actually doing quite well as well. So I don't know how well they're doing now, but at least at the time, right after getting out, we were the first to get funded, grew our company and all that. So yeah, after that, immediately after that, Austin Angels, that's a group of angels in Austin, they gave us $1 million, right? So they were all right, guys, here's $1 million, go develop the product, right? So we went ahead and developed V2, version 2 of Sally. So we developed this entirely in Texas, right? So the way it worked was, my co-founder, the founder, right? So I was employee number 1. So the founder, his name is Deepak Saber. So he would sort of handle most of the electronics and the fundraising, and I handle the manufacturing and the assembly and the mechanical parts, and some electronics as well. So that's sort of the delineation of duties. So we built that, and mid-2015, and then we moved back to the Valley, mid-2016, and then we moved back to the Valley, and then we had to manufacture. And then I moved to China to spearhead the manufacturing capabilities, right?
Because obviously, in China were you doing that manufacturing?
So I was just north of Shenzhen. So it's a place called Dongguan, all right?
Dongguan, yeah, of course. Being in Hong Kong, I know it well, yeah.
I'm sure, exactly. That's right, So in fact, there's a train straight from Dongguan to Hong Kong, right? So I'm not sure if you've taken it, but I take it all the time, right? Yeah. So I used to travel to Hong Kong a lot, So yeah, I moved there. I was there for almost 3 years. So I essentially went from so I essentially designed the architecture of the robot, right? So when I joined, it was an entirely different architecture. So I redesigned the robot and we had this carousel-based system, all right? So I redesigned it and then scaled it. And obviously the scaling was done in China, right?
Yes.
So we built 2 or 3 machines in America, but obviously it's not economical building a manufacturing facility out in America.
Mhm.
So we realized, all right, you know what, China's the place to be. So we moved our, obviously our HQ was still in America,
Mhm.
but I moved to China because I wanted to make sure that, like we built it right? So yeah, China was there for 3 years. We shipped hundreds of salaries around the world. Obviously, it was really helped by the fact that we kept getting funding, right? So we got $1 million, then we got $5 million, then we got $11 million. And then eventually we were acquired late 2020 by DoorDash, right? So yeah, that is our journey in a nutshell. Recently, we moved our manufacturing from China to Malaysia. We still manufacture some parts in China, but we predominantly do it in Malaysia. So yeah.
So whereabouts in Malaysia, and why was that decision taken?
In Johor. So we moved to Johor. Malaysia is pretty good because, first of all, China and America were having a trade war, right?
Right.
And so the tariffs that were slapped on a lot of companies, including ours, was insane.
Right.
So it just didn't make economic sense for us to continue building in China.
Yes.
So we were looking for alternatives.
Yeah.
Our current CEO has worked in Malaysia before. He was heading a factory in Penang, right? So he's very familiar with the manufacturing capabilities of Malaysia.
Yeah.
So he was like, great, let's go to Malaysia. And obviously I'm here. So, it was fortuitous, right? That, so I happened to be here and, he's worked in Malaysia. So we were like, all right, let's just sort of set something up in Malaysia.
And that presumably has been a very good decision because Malaysia, tell me about it, has been much less affected in the supply chain issues that have come up over COVID. Has it over the last 2 years and particularly in the last 6 months because Malaysia hasn't pursued a zero COVID strategy?
Right. So manufacturing was actually really impacted during COVID in Malaysia as well, right? So it was impacted in China. It was pretty bad in China. It was bad in Malaysia as well. It was bad because the policies were inconsistent, right? So I wouldn't entirely blame the government just because they didn't know what they were doing. Just as, like, no one knew what they were doing.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Yes. Yeah.
Exactly. We were sort of feeling in the dark, right? We were just sort of like the blind leading the blind, right? The half blind leading the blind, right?
Yeah.
So we were sort of trying to figure out, like the government was like reading from it. They were like, all right, what do we do? How bad is the disease? How do we sort of cope with it? So there was a time when this was like 2020, 2021. A lot of factories were actually, they were given a directive to essentially like stop, unless it was essential, right? So unless you were producing something that was deemed essential, you were not supposed to work, right? So you essentially shut down for that time period, right? Your operations are suspended. So obviously we suffered from that as well, for weeks on end, So there were some weeks where we were, we just couldn't do anything, And obviously like a lot of foreign workers. So our manufacturing is actually incredibly reliant on foreign workers.
So where do they come from, the foreign workers, Kugan?
A lot of them are from Bangladesh, a lot from Pakistan,
Right.
a lot from Indonesia, right? A lot from Nepal, some from India. But I would say predominantly Bangladesh and Indonesia.
So is that common in Malaysia? Okay.
It's very common.
And
So
the procedures are quite straightforward to bring people in, are they?
From what I hear, it is, right? So obviously it's a lot of paperwork, right? But if you're a big enough company, you'd be willing to jump through the hoops. And that's exactly what they did, right? So to give you some context, in 2018, out of all the jobs that were created, 81% of the jobs went to foreign workers. 81%.
Goodness.
Yeah, all right, which is insane, right? So this is something that we can cover later, right, if you want to talk about it. But I mean, we are over-reliant on foreign workers, right? Mm-hmm. That's one of the issues that we are having. But so point being, so there were 2 issues, right? One is obviously we had to sort of like stop our, like production for a bit. And the other one was obviously these foreign workers were traveling, all right? So like if they went back home, they couldn't come back in because of our code policies, right? Yeah. So because that, we did suffer some interruptions, but eventually we came back online. But this is something that we need to mitigate moving forward, right? So smart manufacturing is incredibly important, all right? And we need to get this done ASAP. If we want to, one, make sure that the next pandemic that comes, we're not as affected, right? Okay, because an assembly line of robots would not give a crap about COVID. They'd be able to function no matter what. That's one. And the other one is obviously productivity.
Actually, you're absolutely right, Kugan. Robots don't catch COVID, do they? They could be part of your marketing strategy.
Exactly. Yeah, so this is the thing, right? So robots don't catch COVID. And the other thing is this, right? So even when we were producing stuff, even when we had our foreign workers here during COVID, even when they were working, there were rules like, okay, you can't have a foreign worker, I mean, forget foreign workers, you can't have anyone, I think, within like 1 meter of each other or something along those lines, right? So our assembly lines, which are like streamlined, right? So obviously, so you'd have guys sitting next to each other, right? Now you couldn't do that.
Yeah.
So it would entirely sort of disrupt how our processes were taking place, right? So let's say, 5 guys, like 5 people would sit next to each other. They couldn't do that. Stand next to each other. They couldn't do that, right? So now you have to have a person, 2 meters away. So the problem with that is this, right? Everything is sort of structured so you've got a table, right? You've got like an assembly line table, right? And the table is, fits, let's say 5 people. But if you've got a rule that says you can't have a person standing within a 2 meter radius of you, then that table is only going to fit 2 people instead of 5 people. Then what do, right? So instead of being able to assemble something, I don't know, let's say it takes 10 hours to assemble something.
Yeah.
Right? It's going to take us 20, 30 hours, depending on, obviously, so,
Yeah, I can imagine the impact of that. That's huge, isn't it? I mean, I'm not particularly your business, but generally, yeah, I must have.
Yeah, absolutely. The good thing is manufacturing is also, I think Martina brought up some like good sort of graphs, right? So manufacturing bounds really beautifully, right? And the reason for this is there was always demand for manufacturing. The reason we couldn't manufacture was 2, right? One was supply chain, right? So we still depend on a lot of raw materials for China, like we depend on China for a lot of raw materials. That's one. And the other one was, we just couldn't produce, even though we wanted to produce, right? Yeah. So the moment the COVID policies were lifted, we could start producing stuff, right? And that's why you see that spike from like 2020 to 2021. You see this insane spike,
yes,
right? And that spike is because like productivity was suppressed in 2020. And then it was like it's like you let go of a spring, right? And then just sort of comes back, right? And then like productivity just went through the roof. Yeah. And then we just started producing a bunch of stuff. And a lot of that is also things like, there's a company called Top Glove, right? Top Glove is the biggest rubber manufacturer, so like rubber product manufacturer in the world, right? Top Glove obviously makes gloves, And so, obviously, we needed rubber gloves, right? Everyone was, wearing PPEs, right? So obviously you needed gloves, and obviously production went through the roof because, no matter what, you need gloves, you need PPEs, so all those things that contributed to that sort of insane spike. Obviously, like all kinds of other things came online. We also make a lot of semiconductors, a lot of chips and all that. So all those came online because there's a global chip shortage, right?
Right. So your experience with the supply chain, did that cause you to rethink any of your supply chain and within Malaysia and source more in Malaysia?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is something that I've noticed, obviously, in my company, and something that I've noted globally as well, right? So prior to COVID, globalization was all the rage, right?
Yeah.
We need to globalize. Why are we globalizing? For economies of scale.
Yes.
It makes sense, right? But the problem is this: it's not resilient, right? So you are sacrificing resilience for your bottom line. But the problem is when you have got a disruptor like COVID coming in, it screws everything up, right? So Toyota and obviously Japanese companies, they sort of pioneered this just-in-time manufacturing, right? Yeah. And obviously just-in-time manufacturing is essentially like every manufacturer you talk to, he's going to say just-in-time manufacturing. And barring some specific manufacturers which manufacture niche items, most manufacturers are going to be just-in-time, right? We don't want to keep too much inventory, right? We want to make it, we want to ship it off. We want to make it, we want to ship it off, right? But this COVID threw a wrench in that. We can't do that anymore, and which means that even if we produce stuff, we can't ship it, right? Or like it doesn't reach people, right? So we need to have some inventory. We need to have some inventory built up, so that supposing this raw material does not arrive from China, at least we have some inventory built up in order to sort of satisfy customer demand, right?
But I suppose overall that does make manufacturing more expensive in a way because it makes it a bit more capital intensive. Because the whole point of just in time was to minimize the capital.
Right. Correct.
But inventory, wasn't it?
You're absolutely right. So, but I would say it's an important trade-off.
Absolutely. It always defied logic to me. I was thinking, really? Right. This is such a good idea. To normal people, it didn't seem so brilliant.
Absolutely, exactly, right? So you don't want to be focusing things that are so important in like one place, right? So China was the manufacturer of the world for the longest time, right? For like 2 decades, right? Which is a horrible idea. It's great for China, That's what they bootstrapped, and China's like amazing now because of that. But it's a horrible idea for everyone else. The reason they did it is because the bottom line, right? Bottom line made sense, right? The economics made sense. But when you have a disruptor coming in, like all that goes through the window, right? So obviously, coming back to what we did, we realized the value of sort of making stuff here in Malaysia, right? So obviously, we make more things here in Malaysia now, just because no matter what happens, like unless like we've got like a national lockdown, we can still source parts here in Malaysia. We can still speak to manufacturers here. We can still get parts from Malaysia. We can still build whatever we want to build. We're still like somewhat reliant on China, but obviously that's a vulnerability we want to eventually phase out, right?
So that sort of enhanced and expanded your ecosystem within Malaysia, and presumably it's the same for a number of manufacturers. And explain to me the smart bit of your manufacturing.
Sure, that's right. So smart manufacturing is essentially infusing high-tech, infusing technology into manufacturing, right? Manufacturing has always been quite technology friendly, right? So Henry Ford introduced the assembly line, right? Prior to Henry Ford, there was no real fully functioning streamlined assembly line, right? Henry Ford pioneered that. But they're still very labor intensive, right? So over the years, obviously, we've become more reliant on automation, on robotics, but it's still quite labor intensive, right? And smart manufacturing is essentially a few technologies, right? Artificial intelligence, robotics. So a lot of these things are overlapping, right? So these are all like sort of like catchphrases, but artificial intelligence, robotics, Internet of Things, big data, analytics, sensors. So Internet of Things sort of covers all kinds of sensors, right? So essentially integrating all these things. So the advantage that it gives you is this. One is it reduces your reliance on labor, on human labor, right? As you can see, human labor is very frail, right? Human labor can, like when COVID strikes or when something else happens, right? Human labor can go away, right? So obviously you don't want that sort of a dependency. There's always going to be some human labor, right? You can't take human labor out 100%, all right? But you need to reduce it, all right? And that's the direction that in which China's going, right? So that's essentially it. And obviously it's great for your bottom line. So the thing with smart manufacturing is this, it's very capital intensive, right? So initially you need to invest in a lot of machinery. Smart manufacturing is, sure, you've got software overlaid on the hardware, but the hardware is the expensive part, right? So that's expensive. But the thing is this, right? It's capital intensive, but if you amortize it over time, it gets cheaper, right? So, while a human worker is going to cost you the exact same or get more expensive as inflation rises, right? A robot worker is going to get cheaper over time.
Well, depending, it's interesting, isn't it? Because it depends how fast they become obsolete, and how much you can upgrade them and all that kind of stuff, presumably.
Absolutely, yeah. So the thing is this, right? Things don't go obsolete overnight. So generally what happens is you would sort of retrofit new solutions into old machinery, right? So I'll give you an example.
It's an engineer's dream, Kugan, isn't it?
I'm sorry?
It's an engineer's dream doing
Yeah, absolutely, exactly. That's right. So you would buy these things. You're not going to retire them anytime soon. Like these things have a life of like 20 years, right? So it's like, okay, so I'll give you like, this is not like super smart manufacturing, but it's like, I would say on the simpler side of automation, a CNC machine, right? So you buy a CNC machine, you want to keep it for 10 years, right? So I know guys who bought their CNC machines 10 years ago who still use them, right? You just overlay more technology on it, just like, a phone that you bought 5 years ago worked perfectly fine now. Sure, you've got better technology now.
Well, except, iPhone seems to have this built-in obsolescence in its batteries, right? They just drain and drain and drain, so you have to get a new one, right?
Exactly, that's right. So thankfully, at least the robotics manufacturers I know don't do stuff like that, all right? Okay, all right. So see, this is a consumer product, right? You can throw away an iPhone and buy another iPhone tomorrow. It's what, it's $1,000, right? It's a lot of money, but it's not as expensive as, a CNC machine, right?
Yeah, I understand, because you're going to be much more specific about building to make it last. Yeah, well, that's brilliant.
Right. That's right. So the robotics equipment that I've encountered are very robust, right? So these things last years, right? And the ones that are sort of more cutting edge are like 3D printers, and 3D printers are cheaper anyway. So you can sort of, use it for 3 years, throw it away, get a new 3D. But having said that, the 3D printer that I used 6 years ago, I can still use today, right? So they've gotten better, right? They've gotten faster, they've gotten cheaper, but fundamentally they haven't changed.
Right.
Okay. There have been some fundamental changes, right? So you've got like filament overlays, right? So that's one sort of technology. The other technology is you've got like a liquid pool, and then you just sort of heat it up, and then it's sort of, So there are some fundamental technologies that are developed, but you can still use a technology that's like 5 years old, right? Yeah, so.
Right. Well, that's all fascinating. So just to really go back into history about Malaysia, obviously Malaysia's got this legacy of the developments in manufacturing that began as far back as the 1950s. Can you tell us a bit about the historical developments and sort of Malaysian culture since, and how all of this is interwoven into the advances now in Malaysian manufacturing? Because it's coming off a long legacy of a long base, isn't it?
Sure, definitely. Okay, so pre-independence, briefly post-independence, we were still very much an agricultural-based society. So agriculture used to account for a third of our GDP.
But very value-added agriculture, right? The rubber and all of that.
Sure, yes. So it's value-added. So yeah, let me go into that, right? So you've got agriculture, and part of agriculture, obviously, we are well endowed, right? We've got plenty of arable land, right? So we can grow rice, we can grow all kinds of vegetables, The thing is, these are not cash crops, right? These are not the money makers. The money makers are palm oil, right? Rubber, right? So these are the cash crops, right? So we've got a long history of cultivating rubber trees for rubber, palm oil. Obviously, the other one is mining, right? So we used to mine a lot of iron ore, a lot of tin. We still do. So all these things are still there. Obviously, like later, we started petroleum, right? And so initially it was very much an extraction-based economy, right? I mean, the fact that we were lucky to essentially be like so dense in human resources, and not human resources, so dense in like natural resources, right? So we sort of extracted this, and our manufacturing was actually very heavily focused on these things, right? So we would post-process the palm oil. We had the manufacturing that sort of complemented our petroleum industry, our rubber industry. So obviously, I give you an example of Top Glove, right? So Top Glove is a company that grew out of Malaysia because we are abundant in rubber, right? I mean, we have a lot of rubber trees, right? So, we've got the natural resource here. So the company was built up here, right? So they manufacture rubber gloves. So essentially, it was, we extracted these natural resources. That is our manufacturing might, right? But something changed in the 70s and the 80s, right? And what happened was there was like a look east policy, all right, in addition to a few other things, right? So what we started doing was we started focusing on electronics manufacturing, right? So we solicited a lot of Japanese investment, all right? This is the 70s, 80s and all that. So Japan was the rising star, right? Yeah. I'm sure you remember, right? Like 20 years ago.
Started all that car manufacturing in Malaysia, right?
Correct, exactly. That's right. So like Japan was, the Asian tiger, right? The success story. And obviously, like Malaysia is very chummy with Japan. And so we got a lot of, investment from Japan, in addition to investment from other countries, right? And so we developed our manufacturing capability there. So it's very semiconductor heavy, all right? And of course, now we manufacture other things as well, right? Optics, semiconductors, a bunch of other things, right? And everything that goes with that. So it's not just, when I say semiconductors, it's not just semiconductors. You've got like packaging semiconductors, you've got testing. So essentially all the capabilities that go with that, right? Because it makes a lot of sense for economies of scale. Like once you have one thing in a country, you just sort of, you add up all the other layers that go with it, right? You just sort of like layer it on, So we did that, which was great, by the way, all right? So the Asian tigers were Singapore, Japan, and South Korea, right? Malaysia was sort of there. We were, like just, shy of these guys. And obviously our economy grew at breakneck speed, right? But, and at this point, so in the 90s, manufacturing accounted for about 35% of our GDP, which is great. And the thing is this, right? You could see that as our manufacturing might grew, so did our GDP, so did our affluence, right? Yeah. So did our standard of living. So everything sort of went up in tandem.
Yeah.
Right. So obviously, a statistician who's listening to say correlation is not causation, right? So I am not saying that is the only reason, But I would contend that it's a major reason. Because, I mean, economics is so like gnarly. You can't like say this is what caused that, right? What you have are best guesses. So this is my educated hypothesis that I have, which is, as our manufacturing grew, so did our economic might. But in the 90s and 2000s, the services industry took over, So the service industry started accounting for more of our GDP. So from accounting for a third of our GDP, manufacturing accounting for a third of our GDP, now it accounts for somewhere between a fifth to a quarter of our GDP, right? And our rate of GDP growth has also lessened, right? Now we're growing at like 4 or 5%.
Mm-hmm. Right? That's kind of healthy. I mean, more than...
It's all right. I mean, it's not 9%, but it's all right, right? Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, the higher the better, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was crazy in the early 90s. I remember being in KL and the traffic was gridlocked. I remember sitting in traffic jams for hours in the early 90s. Yeah.
It was now, by the way. Things haven't gotten better, right? I mean, we've got way more cars, right? So gridlock is like a constant, But yes, it's sort of like tapered a little bit, right?
So what's next for the manufacturing sector then? Presumably smart manufacturing would increase the value add and the value of the manufacturing sector. Yeah. Presumably, the more that smart manufacturing is adopted, the more that's going to happen. And where are you with all of that?
Sure. Okay. So this is where I want Malaysia to go, right? And this is where we can sort of take some pages out of how China and Japan prospered. All right, let's look at China first. China became the manufacturing facility of the world, right? It sucked up all this manufacturing might, right? So initially, people sort of disregarded China. They were like, oh yeah, it's just this backwoods country. We're just manufacturing, I don't know, some chairs. It's manufacturing, a few electronics things. I remember when I was growing up, when I was like 10, 15 and all that, they were like, made in China was a derogatory thing. Right? It's like when you say made in China, that's going to break easily.
Yeah, when I was growing up, made in Hong Kong meant it was cheap.
Okay. I see. Sure, yeah, I didn't encounter that, right? So for me, it was like all made in China, right?
Yeah.
So like, even now, like for some reason, it's still there. Like the stigma is still there. But it's entirely untrue.
Yeah.
Like I lived in China for 3 years. I've seen the manufacturing, like I lived the life, right? So I thought, it's not the case, right?
No, because when you're at the coalface and the cutting edge, that is where a lot of the innovation actually happens.
Correct. So what China did was this, right? Which was very smart, which is something that Japan did a little earlier, right? But China's more recent. So what they did was they sucked up all the manufacturing. They were like, all right, you know what? Give it all to us, right? We'll manufacture everything for you, right? Give it all to us. But at the same time, they also had the Great Chinese Firewall, right? Which meant that they sucked up all the productivity, right? They hollowed out Detroit. Detroit was the auto manufacturing hub of America. If you go to Detroit now, it is it's not a wasteland, but it's a shadow of its former self, right? I mean, Detroit used to be, that's where GM was, right? So that's the auto capital of America. But what happened? The auto capital moved to Japan, right? But okay, so a lot of this manufacturing capability was sucked into China. And then they had this great firewall, which meant that China would not be reliant on the American tech stack. And when I say American tech stack, I'm talking specifically about Google, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, right? The five guys, the five behemoths, right? So their services did not penetrate. Apple was fine. They were fine at Apple just because they thought of Apple as a hardware manufacturer. So that's like, Apple's fine, right? So they were fine at Apple. But everyone else, they sort of blocked off, right? Which means that it gave China the time to suck up all the manufacturing might from the world, from Western countries mostly, right? Mostly from Western countries, and then build up their own infrastructure, right? So right now, China doesn't care. I wouldn't say it doesn't care, but it cares less about what happens to the world, right? Because they've got a largely self-reliant economy, right? So it allowed them to develop companies like Tencent, which develops WeChat. WeChat, by the way, is Instagram, is Facebook and WhatsApp rolled into one. It was like if Facebook and WhatsApp had a baby and they had PayPal, that's WeChat. All right, okay. So what China did was they looked at all the technologies that America had and they just made better versions of it, right?
The translation function on WeChat.
Absolutely. That's how I survived in China. If not for WeChat, I would not survive in China. I would not have survived, right?
And other messaging services just don't have that.
No, they don't. They don't. I mean, and you can pay on it. You've got all these like sort of sub apps inside WeChat, and yeah, it's great, right? So, I mean, I'm not a fan of the user interface, right? I think it's a little clunky, but the functionality itself is awesome, right? So you've got that. You've got Huawei, which is the second biggest phone manufacturer in the world after Samsung. It's hot on the heels of Samsung, right? Samsung was the dominant phone manufacturer, but now. So what I'm getting at is this. What China did was it sucked up all the manufacturing and built up its own companies, right? So Huawei is a giant on its own right? Geely is a car company. It's a giant in its own right? Tencent is a giant in its own right. Alibaba is a giant in its own right. What Malaysia needs to do now is try to suck up as much manufacturing as possible, which it's sort of doing, all right? But what it doesn't have is its own Huawei. It doesn't have its own Tesla, right? It doesn't have its own Toyota. By the way, Japan did something similar, right? So before it was made in China, Japan did some other things, right? But it also manufactured a lot, right? So Japan followed the same arc as well, right? The American cars don't even come close to the reliability of these cars, except Tesla, right? So Tesla is another thing. Tesla is a high-tech startup, it's a beast on its own, right? But if you look at traditional companies, right? So Toyota did that, right? So, Japan did that, right? So Japan did that, China did that. We need to do that, right? We need our own Toyota.
Right, so where are you going to start? Which is going to be the first huge manufacturing company in Malaysia?
Right. So there are a few industries, right? I think number one is we need to invest in drone technology. And the reason I say that is...
You're going to say drone because you have that big drone company, don't you?
We do. We've got one major drone company called Aerodyne, right? So Aerodyne is based here. There's also another one called Polar Drone, right? Polar Drone is a little smaller, but they're also quite innovative, right? So both these guys are drone companies. Aerodyne is actually, by some accounts, the third or the fourth biggest drone company in the world, right? Yeah. You've got DJI. DJI is the biggest drone company in the world. That's based in Hong Kong, China, right? So they've got their manufacturing in Shenzhen. They've got their HQs in Hong Kong, right? But this is where I think Malaysia can pull ahead, right? The reason is this. I've built drones myself, right? So drone technology, the technology is already there, right? The problem is not technology. The problem is regulation. Mm-hmm. The problem is aviation regulation, right? And the reason, Amazon had patents for delivery drones like 8 years ago, all right? So you can actually look up the patents, Amazon's patents on Google Patents, all right? You can actually Google it. They've got this elaborate patents. The reason it hasn't taken off is because of regulation, right? So what I think Malaysia needs to do is relax aviation regulations so we can have delivery drones, all right? Because we've got the technical capability somewhat already, right? Aerodyne is already here, Polar Drone's here, all right? I'm sure there are other guys here who can build drones, right? It's technically not infeasible, right?
Regulation. An aerospace engineer who works in a drone startup in the UK, which does air traffic control for drones, for delivery type drones. I guess that whole software air traffic control system is pretty important as well.
Sure. So I agree, right? So what Aerodyne and Polar Drone and the one you're referring to, they're all doing is they sort of work in this niche industry, right? So air traffic control, they do like agricultural survey. They also some drones can sort of spray fertilizer on plants, check for crop health.
Yeah.
All right. This is all well and good, but the real disruptive tech is delivery drones. Mm-hmm. We can have that. The reason we don't have that is because of regulation, right? Because regulators don't want drones falling in your head when you're walking around, right?
Yeah, understandably.
Understandably. I get that. Fair enough, right? So I'm not trying to denigrate that. I'm not saying, it's not a worry. It is a worry, yes.
Yeah.
But we've overcome bigger technical challenges before. I actually wrote an entire article about how we can do this, right? And I was like, guys, let's relax regulation. We've got a once in a generation opportunity to sort of capitalize on this because America isn't capitalizing on it. China is somewhat sort of doing some delivery drones, but it hasn't conquered the market yet, right? Yeah. So we need to sort of build up our drone capability and conquer the market, right? Yeah. So we build up a moat, right? Like a technical and logistics moat. We can sort of export this expertise to other countries. That's number one. So that's
Great. So any other suggestions for other industries? We should have a session on drones, Gugan, because this is very interesting, isn't it? Yeah. So which would
Absolutely.
come in other two industries you think where you could grab opportunity?
The other one is, I think, agriculture, right?
Yeah.
So agriculture technology. So I've been fascinated by agricultural technology for a long time.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And the reason agriculture technology hasn't been as successful as it should be is because one of the reasons is the average age of the Malaysian farmer is 53,
Mm-hmm.
right? So obviously it's an aging population, right? Young people don't want to do agriculture, right? Which is very unfortunate. Like
You
agriculture,
might want to do high-tech agriculture.
exactly. That's exactly right, right? So I wrote another article on this as well, right? So I was like, we need to do high-tech agriculture, right? So that's another opportunity we could capitalize on because, I mean, we have like plenty of arable land, right? So we can do many things. So there's this thing called precision agriculture. Right? Precision agriculture is essentially applying Internet of Things to agriculture, and not just Internet of Things, robotics, robotic harvesters, plenty of sensors, soil sensors, moisture sensors, heat sensors, solar panels, indoor farming, vertical farming. You can also tweak. So for vertical farming, there are many things you can do, right? So you can tweak like the carbon dioxide content in vertical farming. Contrary to what a lot of people say, carbon dioxide is actually great for plants. All right. So, but yes, so, I think agriculture technology is something that we need to capitalize on. We can do this. And I know that, so if you look at the 12th Malaysia plan, so Malaysia has this thing where every few years they put up these plans, right? So you've got like the 11th Malaysia plan, 10th Malaysia plan. So the 12th Malaysia plan came out some time ago. And they actually mentioned some things that are pretty solid, right? But the thing is, I just don't know about the follow through, right? Is it actually, is it all talk and no action?
Yeah.
Or is the action going to fall flat, right?
Right.
I'm hoping it doesn't, right?
I guess you need a mixture of private enterprise with a regulatory regime, as you'd said, drones.
Correct. Absolutely.
Good. I think we've been talking for almost an hour, so it's amazing how quickly time flies. We have a couple of questions from the audience, which just before we go, I would like to deal with quickly. I think this is a comment perhaps, but it says this makes Malaysia sound like the UK or Israel or Hong Kong with no big names. Will this change? Well, I think you've kind of answered that, isn't it? That you're trying to, that you're saying, well, you can create big names because you're going to advance the...
We need to, honestly, I think it's essential. We can't just keep relying on like low value manufacturing. We need to go into high value manufacturing and then full stack manufacturing, right? So right now what we're doing largely is like low value manufacturing, right? So as you move up the value stack, you start building a moat, right? And as you start building a moat, it just becomes that much more difficult to displace you as an economic powerhouse, all right? That's what Malaysia needs to do, right? So it needs to move out the manufacturing value chain and then eventually build a full stack. When I say full stack, I mean like a full stack company, like a Toyota, like a Huawei, right? So we do everything here. So yeah.
There's another question. Are you confident that the geopolitical issues that have worked against China recently won't affect Malaysia as well?
I don't know which geopolitical.
I think it must be the trade conflicts that you.
Right.
Yeah.
I doubt it. Malaysia generally does not fight with a lot of other countries. Malaysia is generally like the, don't trouble me, I won't trouble you kind of country. Yes. So Malaysia, I don't think so. I don't think there's going to be like that.
Malaysia has a lot of friends. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah.
Another question. Does the fact that so many jobs go to foreign workers incur any political wrath of anybody? Is that an issue in Malaysia?
Yeah, some people talk about it. But the thing is, you can't like eject them. We are largely reliant on them. Right. So we still need them. Even if we want to phase them out, we need to phase them out. Like it's got to be like over like 5-year, 10-year period. We just can't go like, all right, guys, time to go. Our entire.
The more you move to higher value manufacturing, which is more automated, that will be sort of resolve itself the situation. Perhaps.
I'm hoping so. So what I'm hoping for is we need to provide these guys with tax breaks, whatever it is, right? Incentives, favorable loans. In order to develop manufacturing capability, because it's going to be quite capital intensive, right? But once they build it out, when you amortize it, it gets cheaper over time, right? So we just need to push them over the hump, right? Once we push them over the hump, it's going to be good. It's going to be, I wouldn't say like steady going, but it's going to be better, right? So we need to sort of we just need to like slowly wean ourselves off.
Yeah, because too much cheap and competent labor is
Correct.
incentive to innovation in a way.
Correct. So see, I'm not against immigration. I'm actually very pro-immigration, right? I'm talking about we need skilled labor, not low-skilled labor, right? So that's what America is built on. America is built on skilled labor.
Absolutely. People who are going to come and build these great.
Right. Immigration is great, but yeah, we need high-skilled immigration, right? So we're always going to be stuck there.
Well, I guess we've actually gone over our allotted time, and so that brings us to the end, Gugan. It was so interesting to talk to you. It's so insightful. Time's gone so quickly. I hope we're going to have another chance to chat about manufacturing, perhaps drones next time, and all the amazing milestones that the Malaysian manufacturing industry, I'm sure, is going to achieve after talking about it today. I'd like to thank everyone who's joined the webinar for being with us today. So we look forward to seeing you again on another event. And thank you very much for joining us today. Bye. Bye.